There we go. All right. So I would like to introduce the organizer of today's event. And before I do, I want to say that this young lady has been absolutely phenomenal. We are so proud to have her as our youth lead organizer for the Abolish Slavery National Network, Sarah Corbett.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, especially on this critical day in DC history. Today marks DC Emancipation Day, the day when the Compensated Emancipation Act was passed back in 1862. I speak to you on this day, at this place, because our nation is in the midst of a reckoning, specifically with the persistence of slavery. I'm the youth lead organizer for the Abolish Slavery National Network, a national coalition fighting to abolish constitutional slavery and involuntary servitude in all forms for all people. Quote, we envision a United States where all people, without exception, are free from slavery and involuntary servitude, and where all people are protected by their state and federal constitution. Yet, this is not the reality, and that is why I joined ASNN in the first place. As a white girl, I understand that I will never have to experience what being Black in America is. I will never have to experience my whole entire life in the criminal justice system, within a system that is slavery. I know that my job is to support the work of those who have been impacted by everything that I speak about, not to silence and not to drown out. I'm constantly learning, which is one of the reasons why social justice is so important to me. Generally, I've always been passionate about social justice, which has been further exacerbated by living in a politically active household and by reading Just Mercy in 2019. Growing up with parents that have stressed the importance of empathy, the acknowledgement of privilege, and the urgency of action, it has led me exactly to this point. As soon as I came to realize that DC still had slavery, I knew that I had to act. I could not proudly tell people that I lived in DC, the DC area, knowing that slavery still existed. As many of you know, DC falls under the jurisdiction of our federal government, meaning that we do not have our own state constitution, meaning that we have no wiggle room with our laws and amendments. By definition, we fall under the 13th Amendment, the same 13th Amendment that allows for slavery. In essence, the 13th Amendment states that we cannot have slavery except for, quote, punishment of a crime whereof the parties shall be duly convicted, end quote. So slavery, just in our criminal justice system. ASNN has fought for years to get rid of this in all states, as well as a federal amendment called the Abolition Amendment. This amendment, proposed by Representative Nikema Williams of Georgia and Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, would officially prohibit the use of slavery and involuntary servitude for punishment of a crime. This effort is ongoing and has been supported by the work ASNN has done in individual states. So far, we have abolished slavery in 7 states, with even more on the ballot this year. While DC, as you know, is not a state, that does not mean we are exempt from action. We can use the uniqueness of DC to our advantage by passing a sense of the council. With this sense of the council, we can affirm not only DC's support of the Abolition Amendment and the abolition of slavery in the district, but we can commit DC to human rights and further action on it. Across the country, incarcerated people are working with little to no pay under the threat of punishment. In Louisiana, for example, incarcerated individuals work in cotton fields, supervised by men on horseback. If they don't work, they may be forced into solitary confinement. This is the case across many other states as well. Even though the system is different in DC, the framework of slavery still persists. Incarcerated people in DC work for about $32 a month, which translates to about 14 cents an hour for a 7-day, 8-hour work week. If they refuse to work, they also suffer consequences like loss of social visits, canteen privileges, phone calls, parole, probation denials, etc. This is a human rights issue also compounded by a racial one. As the DC prison population, or the DC prison system, is 95% Black, almost double the population in DC, which currently sits at 45%. DC is the heart of the United States of America, the heart of the so-called freest nation in the world. As the US, we stand for human rights, we stand for liberty and justice for all. However, at our core, we fail to fulfill it. With the sense of the Council, we have the opportunity to not only support human rights, but bring fire to the abolition movement and stand with our fellow states that have abolished slavery completely. We have to think collectively about what DC represents, what DC stands for, and with this sense of the Council, we can make it clear. I'd like to finish with a quote from the great abolitionist Ernestine Rose. If you allow one single germ, one single seed of slavery to remain in the soil of America, that germ will spring up. That noxious weed will thrive and again stifle the growth, wither the leaves, blast the flowers, and poison the fair fruits of freedom. Because of the exception clause in the 13th Amendment, we breathe that poison today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It is the youth that are going to help take this movement into the future. So next, I would like to introduce to you one of my most favorite humans on the planet, Max Parthis. Max is the National Campaign Coordinator and Director of State Operations for Abolish Slavery National Network. He is also the Executive Director of the Paul Cuffey Abolition Center in Sumter, North Carolina. Max?
As she said, I am Max Parthis, and also director of the Paul Cuffey Abolitionist Center in Sumter, South Carolina. We just celebrated or recognized the start of the Civil War just a couple days ago, which happened in Fort Sumter, South Carolina. So I kind of feel connected in many ways. The Abolish Slavery National Network is a coalition of organizers representing states and districts all across America. At this present time, we have successfully removed exception clauses which allow for slavery as a punishment for crime from 7 states, bringing it into a total. That's right, it's worth the clapping for, right? 7 states, bringing it to a total of 8 states, because Rhode Island was the only state that actually abolished slavery without a caveat, and they did that in the 1850s. Not again did you see anything like that occur until 2018, when Colorado became the first state to remove a slavery exception clause from their constitution that allowed for slavery and involuntary servitude as a punishment for crime. Since then, we have gotten over 30 states involved. For the years of 24, 25, and 26, there are 30 states behind us with legislation at some point or another moving forward through the legislative system. So there's a lot of hope ahead. Now, why are we doing this? Because we're here on Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. It's the day when Lincoln did this, right? When he supposedly freed the slaves. But what many people don't know is that they had already put into place a transition from chattel slavery, where the individual could own people, to prison slavery, where the state became the owner of people. And that transition was known as convict leasing. Convict leasing did not begin in the South. It actually began in the North. Vermont was the first state to introduce an exception clause into their constitution in order to exploit prison labor, and they did it in 1777. Then 8 other states did the same thing, including DC, which is not a state, but did the same thing all the way up until 1865, when it was introduced into the 13th Amendment. Not many of us realized what was going on at that point, that they had legalized slavery and involuntary servitude, and convict leasing boomed in this nation. At one point in Alabama, the GDP was based on slavery, 90% of it. In 1874, 70% of their GDP was based on convict leasing. So it just went from one thing to another thing right after that. even in places like Texas, where they celebrate Juneteenth. Again, the alleged end of slavery, convict leasing thrived. And in convict leasing, many historians say it's worse than slavery. Now, why would they say that? It's because during chattel slavery, there was some concern for your merchandise, whether or not they lived or died, whether or not they were healthy or strong, whether or not they could have babies or not. But when it came to convict leasing, there was a slogan, a saying that said, one dies, get another. There was uh, a book by J. Mancini called Convict Leasing in the American South, 1865 to 1928, where he said that with prisoners so plentiful, the only difference between slavery and convict leasing was that there were was that prisoners were so plentiful. I got that a little backwards, but I think you understood what I meant. The only difference was there was prisoners were so plentiful. So if they would work you, they could literally work you to death, and if you died, they'd get somebody to replace you just that easy. They criminalized black life with things like black codes and pig laws, which turned our communities into basically shopping malls for enslavers, where whenever they needed employment in a mine or on a plantation, they would just go get us for loitering or vagrancy or looking at somebody wrong or just make something up in order to put them into these prisons and jails and work them for free. And the average lifespan for inmates during this period was only 10 years. 10 years. And we're not talking about just adults. This happened to men, women, and children. Uh, Convict leasing allegedly was abolished in this country, with the last state being Alabama in 1928 to give it up. But that's not the case even today. The Associated Press came out with an article several weeks ago, you may remember, where they showed how even Alabama is still using convict leasing. They had inmates on the an egg farm. Uh, at the moment, I'm trying to think of the name. Hickman Farm, where they had Hickman's Farms, where the inmates were living on the farm, working for free or pennies on the dollars for Hickman's Farms. They were working at McDonald's. They had to follow the trucks from the prisons where the inmates were dropped off at McDonald's. They put on a suit, they go to work, and then they go back to prison at the end of the day. They even stopped by a slave plantation where they dropped two black men off into a kitchen to go in there and cook food for the tourists who was there. And these were incarcerated individuals who were being leased out at a freaking plantation. Amazing. You know, I want to talk about a couple things and I'm close it up. One, what if versus what is. We have tried so many times to get this issue pushed to the forefront and get our bills passed. But more often than not, we are met with brick walls where either a Senate president or a committee chairman gets to decide for the entire state whether or not they even get a chance to vote as to whether or not they want slavery in their state constitution. It's blocked left and right. And they come up with these what if scenarios. Well, what if we end slavery? Do we have to pay inmates minimum wage? What if we end slavery? Do we have to release people now who are wrongfully convicted? What if we end slavery? How much is it going to cost the state? What if, what if, what if? And it's the same rhetoric we heard in the 1800s. What are we going to do with these Negroes if we let them go? If we end slavery, what are we going to do with them? It's the same rhetoric over and over and over again. So I don't want us to get lost in the weeds. I don't want to talk about whether or not prison labor is the only example of slavery, because it's not. We're talking about 5 million people on probation and parole who are subject to the 13th Amendment, who are still owned by the states. Over 5 million people. And not to mention, we've turned our police basically into slave catchers because our system of justice has become a for-profit industry following market values. So when you go out and arrest one of these young men on the street, where 1 in 3 young black men are expected to be arrested or incarcerated during their lifetime, when you go out and do that and you put them in these jails and they charge this taxpayers $200,000-300,000 a year to house them. That's all part of the system of slavery. That's what is. What is right now is in your Constitution, in the federal Constitution, as well as in the charter here from 1862 for Washington, D.C., that slavery is legal. Period. And that, ending that, is worth every fight we're involved in. We don't need to fight over whether inmates get paid. Slavery is legal. How about if we just end that and begin there? That's worth the fight. Just today, I read the news that in Dublin, California, a women's prison was closed down. And the women who were in the prison are being transferred to other prisons. Why? Because the guards were raping them. The guards were molesting them. And this is all part of slavery. It's all part of a system of slavery. Sexual exploitation has always been connected to slavery. You have these captive women that you're taking advantage of, and it's gotten so bad that the whole damn prison needed to be shut down and the women sent off to other places. And it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. The same thing has occurred in places like Tutwiler's prison in Alabama, as well as other facilities. This is unacceptable. We want one thing and one thing only. We want slavery to be illegal in this country. Just as you said it was supposed to be. Just as this is supposed to represent emancipation, how can you possibly have freedom, justice, equality, while slavery is still legal in your Constitution? And not only is it legal, it's in freaking practice. Every single day, where men and women and children are being hunted in the street, criminalized like they did with the black codes and vagrancy laws, to the point where in 2017, we had more arrests for personal possession of marijuana than we had for all violent crimes combined. This has got to end. Slavery should be illegal in this country right now. And since it's not, the ASNN is here to make sure that it does happen. I want to give you some hope. As I said, there's over 30 states right now. More than half the country is involved in this effort to do what we're doing. Remove exception clauses or insert anti-slavery language into those states that don't have any language to protect the citizens. So hope is right around the corner, and we have been succeeding. I want to close out by asking you for your help. Please go to our website, abolishslavery.us. You'll find many resources there to help educate you on this issue, as well as the ability to be able to join our mailing list, volunteer your efforts, as well as your money and your resources and time to help us end slavery in the United States for the first time completely across this country. And we also have, as was mentioned by Sarah, a federal joint resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 33, which will introduce a brand new amendment that will counter the 13th Amendment, where there will be no slavery or involuntary servitude, including as a punishment for crime. I'm not saying all inmates are innocent. I'm not saying they're all guilty. What I am saying is, I don't care what you did. There is no justification for turning somebody into property and then selling them on the open market in the form of jail bonds and prison stocks. That is unacceptable. Thank you very much. God bless. Have a blessed day.
Thank you again, Max. It's kind of hard to come behind Max. So just a few things that I want to touch on. Number one, so I'm also out of California, where last bill cycle, our bill was ACA 3, the California Abolition Act. At that time, our bill was authored by then California State Assembly member Sidney Comlager Dove, who during the course of that transitioned to California State Senator. And this year, she is United States Representative Congresswoman Sidney Comlager Dove. Last year, California and our governor made it very clear that despite California's progressive, self-claimed progressive nature, California said it was going to cost too much to end legalized constitutional slavery. Last year, California said, we are pro-slavery and we want to keep it that way. A lot of people don't know that. And this year, I am asking for the public's help because we are on the same trajectory of having our bill killed again. It is just shameful that in 2024, we continue to have a conversation about the economic value of humanizing people. I don't know if this statue disturbs you as much as it disturbs me, but to see a black man kneel down and a white man standing over him with what looks like the Bible in his hand, proclaiming him to be free. Living in a country where the Constitution says that people who look like me were deemed 3/5 of a human being for purposes of representation in a socially, economically constructed society that we call a democracy, when in fact we are a corporate capitalist society. When you hear us say Black Lives Matter, what we're saying is a Black life has no value in this economically constructed social system unless we are a commodity. That is why the prison industrial complex looks the way that it does. Max touched on a lot of things. I want to give a special recognition to Sister Warriors Freedom Center out of California. Sister Warriors Freedom Center has been at the center of this fight with us to abolish legalized constitutional slavery in the state of California. That is not to exclude any of our other coalition members, but I'm specifically talking about Sister Warriors right now because Sister Warriors are also the women behind having that prison shut down in Dublin. After doing extensive research and going inside and talking to the women and coming up with the data, they were successful with the coalition of being able to bring to light what has been happening inside of these carceral systems to our women. Most of the time when we are talking about incarceration, we are talking about the male population. Do not get it confused. Women are being enslaved as well. The Constitution of the state of California, as is the federal Constitution, and constitutions throughout, state constitutions throughout this nation, all hold an exception clause that slavery is prohibited and involuntary servitude is permitted as punishment for a crime. Not in 2024. I want to send a special shout out and thank you to U.S. Representative Nikema Williams out of Georgia, Senator Jeff Merkley out of Oregon, Representative Sidney Kamlager Dove out of California, Senator Cori Bush out of New Jersey, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Representative Barbara Lee, and the 190 U.S. congressional representatives that are co-sponsoring Senate Joint Resolution 33 to finally bring an end to legalized constitutional slavery on a federal level in this country. With that, I would like to introduce one of the most profound living legends today. She is a direct descendant of one of the greatest female abolitionists of all time. Welcome, Ernestine Tina Wyatt.
Thank you, everyone. I am a 3 times great grandniece of Harriet Ross Tubman, a woman of faith, family, and freedom. Aunt Harriet was an abolitionist, as I am, and her skills on the Underground Railroad were called upon during the Civil War to fight for freedom for all, the enslaved, and to help ensure democracy in the United States. She did this as a spy and a scout, and finally leading a military raid on the Combahee River in Beaufort, South Carolina, June 2nd, 1863, freeing 750 enslaved persons. Initially, she was not pleased with the actions taken by President Lincoln and felt the only way to win the war was to free the enslaved. She gives the analogy of slavery being a snake and says, suppose there was an awful big snake down there on the floor. He bites you, folks all scared because you may die. You send for the doctor to cut the bite, but the snake rolled up there, and while the doctor is doing it, he bites you again. The doctor cuts out the bite, but while he is doing it, the snake springs up and bites you again. And so he keeps doing this over and over till you kill him. That's what Master Lincoln ought to know. Today, we are here to celebrate Washington, D.C. as the first to be emancipated from slavery on April 16th, 1862. Mind you, with reparations paid to their enslavers, where the enslaved got nothing. However, emancipation did not happen for the rest until 8.5 months later. Finally, in 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, freeing all enslaved, or so we thought. There was a caveat to that 13th Amendment called the Exceptions Clause, a loophole for the states that continue slavery through convict leasing. And today we must be aware of the present need to remove the loopholes that can once again ensnare us by letting that clause stand. In today's political climate, we are seeing swinging changes by returning to laws that once restricted us and giving power to a few, returning to oppression and removal of personal rights for many. Examples are book banning, forbidding the teaching of Black history in America, and changing the language and narrative of it, and the removal of the Black vote. It only takes a few to do this as long as we follow that with acts of complacency. The fact is that things are moving so quickly, and it seems like no one is noticing. But we are trying to go backwards, not forwards. And with this, we have to stop the return to the 1800s and what some call the years that made America great. Thank you.
All right, can we get another round of applause, please? Thank you, thank you. We don't have a whole lot of living legends that we can identify that are with us, and so we are beyond grateful to you, Miss Tina, for your presence here with us today. So next to the microphone, I would like to introduce Johanna Thompson. She is the master strategist of several things, and she is here from Florida.
Representing the South out here. I'm really glad to be here today amongst our younger generations leading this effort here in Washington, D.C., and also all of those who are actually working in this fight today to make sure that we are shifting the way that our people that are currently incarcerated are treated within the prison system. And I really just want to call in this moment all my relatives. And I say relatives as an invitation to think about the sentient beings that exist in the world. And if we start to think of each other as relatives, then we will be able to recognize the humanity within each other that we have and recognize what the interconnectedness is amongst all of us, so that we can start thinking about our incarcerated community members in a different way, not as folks that need to be punished and to be set into contracted labor and to have free labor and to not be able to get the supports that they need to have a transformation. I'm asking you to start to imagine one of your relatives being in this situation, being incarcerated, never reaping the benefits of the free labor that they're putting out or being forced into. That's exactly the antithesis of the freedom that the US claims to be. We're a country that is supposed to epitomize freedom, and we've never done that. And especially in this moment, we are not doing a very, very good job at being the models that we want it to be. And that we have prisons and slavery have never been the answers to the freedom that we're looking for. So how do we turn towards the side of freedom that we claim to want to be? Angela Davis offers that we move against and beyond prison, struggling against race, gender, and class oppressions that fuels violence and create new equitable institutions and ways of life. And so I stand here amongst those who care about ending slavery in a real way, not simply in rhetoric. We can shift our economic models from slavery to build cooperative communities that actually create the safety that we want to see. And if we model taking care of the least of us, the most of us will benefit. We can emancipate ourselves from prison profiteering, and we can begin to develop different economic models that will really elevate us into the freedom that we claimed to have been founded on in the creation of this US territory. So I'm calling in all of my relatives in this moment to join us in this effort, to go to visit ASN National Network so that we can abolish slavery in all of our states.
All right, thank you, Jay. And so we are going to get ready to conclude today's press conference and rally. And we are going to bring back to the microphone our amazing youth lead organizer, Sarah. Sarah is a DC native, and she is the reason why we are here. We flew from all over the country to be here to support Sarah today. So, Sarah, come on up and close us out.
For all this good work you did.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jamelia, for that. I just want to make an appeal to everyone who lives in DC and everyone around the world. Slavery is still legal in the United States, and we still see it even in DC, even in the heart of the United States, even in the District of Columbia, even where it said emancipation, even when we have a day specifically in DC celebrating emancipation, yet that is not the case. Less than half of DC is Black, yet the prison system is the majority Black, with 95% of incarcerated people in the DC prison system being Black. This is not just human rights. This is also racial injustice that we need to fix. So, with that, I hope that all of you now can reach out to our website, abolishslaverydc.org, and Abolish Slavery National Network, our website, and take action now to formally end slavery and urge the DC Council to pass a sense of the Council in DC that not only supports the Abolition Amendment, but supports a sense of the Council passing and abolishing slavery in the future and all forced labor practices. Thank you for coming, everyone.
And with that, we have concluded our day. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
End slavery now.